back. I'm here with Chuck Norris. You mentioned that you've trained a lot of black belts who were in Russia.
You're actually a dramatic farewell. No final scene, no public goodbye, just a quiet moment. And then the news spread. Chuck Norris was gone. At 86, a man who had built his image on strength, discipline, and near mythical toughness left the world in a way that felt almost unreal. For decades, he had been more than an actor, more than a fighter. He had become a symbol, the man who never backed down, the man who never broke. And yet, behind that image, there was something far more human. Because in the days that followed his death, another question began to surface. Not about his films, not about his fame. We upload celebrity news daily basis, so don't forget to like and subscribe the channel, but about what he left behind. A $70 million fortune, a lifetime of work, and a family that would now carry his legacy forward. The assumption might be simple, that a man like Chuck Norris would leave behind a complicated web of disputes, hidden tensions, or unfinished business. That wealth at that level would invite conflict. But what emerged instead told a very different story. According to those close to him, the plan had already been quietly set in place long before his final days. No chaos, no courtroom battles waiting to happen, just a structure designed with intention. His estate, estimated at around $70 million, was expected to be divided among the 6 people who mattered most to him: his wife and his 5 children. The surface, it sounded straightforward. But beneath that decision was something more revealing, a philosophy he had carried for years. He didn't see his wealth as a prize to be fought over. He saw it as protection, stability, a way to support the people he loved long after he was gone. And that raises a deeper question. How does a man build that kind of clarity in a life that was anything but simple? To understand that, you have to go back, not to the end, but to the rise. Before the fame, before the global recognition, Chuck Norris was building something quietly. Discipline came first. Martial arts became his foundation. It wasn't just a career choice, it was a way of life. That discipline carried him into Hollywood. Slowly at first, then all at once. Films like The Delta Force and later Walker, Texas Ranger didn't just make him famous. They shaped his identity in the public eye. Strong, unshakable. A man who always stood on the right side of the fight. But fame, like everything else, came with layers the audience never fully saw. Behind the image was a personal life that had its own complications. He married young. His first marriage lasted decades before ending in divorce. During that time, there were decisions, relationships, and consequences that quietly reshaped his family structure, including a daughter born outside of that marriage. These weren't the kinds of details that defined his public persona, but they mattered because over time his life expanded into something more complex than the roles he played. 5 children, different chapters, different histories, and eventually a second marriage to Gina O'Kelly in 1998, a relationship that would become central to his later years. For many, balancing that kind of personal history could create distance, fractures, even resentment. But in Norris's case, something unusual happened. He appeared to move toward unity. Those close to him described a man who became increasingly focused on family as the years went on, not just in words, but in decisions. His wealth grew, not only from acting, but from business ventures, endorsements, and strategic opportunities. He wasn't just earning, he was building. A martial arts league, brand partnerships, books, appearances. He understood the value of his name, and he used it carefully. But even as his financial world expanded, his personal priorities seemed to narrow. Family became the center, and that makes what happened later even more significant. Because strength, real strength, is often tested not in moments of success, but in moments of vulnerability. In 2017, that test came suddenly. After attending an event in Las Vegas, Norris suffered 2 heart attacks in a short span of time. For a moment, everything that defined him, his endurance, his control, was put into question. Those who witnessed it described chaos, uncertainty, a situation that could have ended his life right there. He survived. But survival like that changes something. It forces reflection. It shifts priorities. It reminds even the strongest individuals that time is not unlimited, and perhaps that moment played a role in what came next. Because from that point forward, there was a noticeable shift in how he approached life. Less noise, more privacy, less about proving strength, more about preserving what mattered. And that brings us back to the question of his estate.
You mentioned that you've trained a lot of black belts who were in
By the
Russia.
time of his passing, the structure was already understood within the family. There were no sudden decisions, no last-minute changes, just a clear intention. His wife, Gina, and his 5 children would share what he built. Not equally in a rigid sense, but fairly, based on what he believed reflected both his wishes and their lives. That distinction matters, because fairness in a family like this is rarely simple. Different ages, different relationships, different histories. And yet, the expectation wasn't conflict, it was understanding. That alone says something about the environment he left behind. Because wealth doesn't just test families after death, it reflects how they were shaped during life. And in this case, it seems he spent years preparing not just his finances, but his legacy. Still, there's another layer to this story that can't be ignored. The contrast between the man the world believed he was and the man his family experienced privately. On screen, he was unstoppable, a force, almost invincible. But off-screen, he faced the same realities as anyone else. Health scares, personal mistakes, complicated relationships, and perhaps that's what makes his final chapter feel more complete. Because it wasn't defined by perfection, it was defined by intention. A man who lived a life of discipline. Trying to bring that same discipline into how his story would end. No dramatic disputes, no lingering questions about who gets what, just a quiet transition. And that brings us back to where this story began. A sudden loss, a global reaction, and a question about what remained. The answer, it turns out, isn't just about money. Yes, there's a $70 million estate. Yes, it will be divided among those closest to him. But what he really left behind is something less measurable, a legacy of control in a world that often spirals into chaos. A reminder that even in a life filled with fame, strength, and complexity, it's possible to bring clarity to the end. And maybe that's the part people didn't expect. Because for a man who spent decades being seen as larger than life, his final act was something surprisingly grounded, quiet, thoughtful, and deeply human.